Thank you very much, folks. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Sure, my slide projector is awake. Very good. So, cobblestone masonry, what's it all about? I'm sure you've seen the cobblestone buildings in the region, and maybe you wondered about them. But I guess what we're going to cover tonight is why cobblestones. Where did they come from? What are they all about? Why did the early settlers use them as a building material? And why did they stop using it as a building material? So hopefully before we're finished this evening, we'll cover most of those topics. So what you see here in this map is really the reason for cobblestones. This is an example of at the end of the last ice age. You can see what we call the St. Lawrence River is blocked, so water is backing up. What we know as Lake Ontario actually was called Lake Iroquois in archaeology days. It came all the way up to what we know as Ridge Road, Route 104. So the water didn't have a way to escape when the glacier was melting, so the lake shore actually became Route 104 Ridge Road, the old Indian Trail that ran along the southern edge of Lake Iroquois. And as 10,000 years ago, as the Ice Age was approaching, it brought things that were in its way with it. The roughly mile thick sheet of ice pushed anything that was in its way as it advanced. So we had limestone and other granite coming down from Canada that was deposited here when the glacier left. As it started to recede, all the rubble and everything that came with it was left in the fields. Move forward another 10,000 years when the settlers arrived, it had just become a virgin forest at that point. But when they took down enough trees to build their log cabins, they also took down more trees and found the fields for the crops, and they found that the fields were full of these small rounded lumps which were left from the last ice age. And really, they were just a nuisance stone. They were in their way, so they made piles and didn't think much about them until after they became successful. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. So what do we define as a cobblestone? It's a stone that fits in one hand. It's from the Old English word cob, which means a handful. So a cobblestone is any stone that fits in one hand. A smaller stone was called a pebble, and a larger stone a boulder, but if it fits in one hand, it was called a cobblestone. We know of basically two different types of cobblestone. I think the next slide we have some examples. Yeah. There you can see different types of cobblestones. The large one in the center, that's still just a handful. That's called a field cobble. That's what the farmers found in great quantities when they turned the soil over and discovered these nuisance stones that were left. They're very irregular, very not smooth, not polished. The smaller smooth ones are actually the same stone with another 10,000 years of lakeshore erosion. So the same cobblestone that left to become part of the ecosystem in a waterway will become smooth like that, much smaller and much more smooth. So both of those eventually became used as building materials for cobblestone homes. And both of them were found by the pioneers as they arrived. Even the small lake wash stones were found in the farmers' fields away from the lake because of the lake action that I told you about on the Ridge Road, which was the old shoreline. So you can find this lake wash stone even up as far as Lake Route 104, Ridge Road. You can see a couple different forms of cobblestone masonry construction. We'll talk more about that as we get into it. But that was the basic building block of the cobblestone architecture. So we recognize about three different periods of cobblestone architecture. There's the early period where basically the farmers were using these stones that they had collected in their fields, the large rounded lumps, to create buildings. And then as you advance, the whole process took place from about 1820 to the Civil War. So all the cobblestone buildings that you see in western New York basically were built over a 45-year period. As you proceed through time, as you add time to that equation, the buildings became much more, the early ones were very utilitarian, very simple, usually small structures, limited to what would take place in those buildings. There were homes usually, or churches or schools. But as time went on, they became larger and they became more elaborate, especially the fronts of the buildings. If you look at it, get up close and look at the cobblestone buildings, you usually see a lot of effort was put into making an artistic presentation in the front of the building. The sides and back usually, let's get this job done, that type of thing. Here's an example of one such utilitarian building. This is one of our 3 cobblestone buildings we have at the Cobblestone Museum. It's called the Ward House, named after the last occupant of the building, Einhaus Ward. The original cobblestone building, you can see at the base, they lived in the basement for several years as they were building this. So you can see a different type of demarcation in the lower 2 or 3 feet. So they lived in the basement, and then later on they built the upper story. The wooden addition to the left was put on in the 1900s. So it's probably pretty typical of cobblestone masonry that over a period of time, people added more to it to make it larger and more comfortable. I'm going to just point out in the corner there, the nice tight corners, you see those sandstone or limestone blocks. Those were quarried locally as well, along with all the individual stones. But those are quarried sandstone or limestone, and they're used to make a nice tight corner. I'm going to show you examples of where they didn't use those, and but it allows you to have a watertight corner. So here again, that was either Medina sandstone or local limestone that was quarried in the vicinity of where these houses were built. So those are called coins. If I didn't say that, here's a Scrabble word: Q-U-O-I-N-S. So you got a Q and want to use it. Q-U-O-I-N-S. I went the wrong way, didn't I? Stones were gathered by families. It really was a family affair. Farmers would send their kids out into the fields and they would load stones onto a stone boat, and the ox would pull the stones up to wherever they were going to store them at the time. So they sorted them in something called a sorting bee, so they were sorted by size. The next slide shows how they would do that. 2 different apparatus for doing that: a sorting board or beetle rings. Either one of those is the same type of principle. Whatever the size of the stone that you would pass through that most closely resembles the size of the stone would tell you which pile you're going to put the stone in. The process of building these, talking about the glue was not Portland cement. Portland cement really wasn't perfected until late 1860s. So the glue was the historic masonry that was available at the time. It was lime mortar. It was achieved by taking limestone, which was quarried locally, putting it in a lime kiln, which you see here, an example of one. These even themselves were built out of limestone, but a fire was built in the bottom, and then it's usually put in the side of a hill, so that you could take your wagon and take the limestone itself to the top of the hill, to the top of the chimney, and drop the limestone in. And after about 2 days of high temperature firing, the limestone, which would change its chemical composition and just become quicklime. Quicklime could be beaten with a hammer to create a powder, and then the powder was advanced sand and water to create a paste. And that slurry was what was used as a mortar for cobblestone buildings. So the walls themselves, basically it was a 2-wall process. There was a thick rubble wall, which was about 18 inches thick, and then which was the supporting member for the house. It was what kept the house standing. Then on the outside of that was the cobblestone veneer. The veneer was not supporting the building, it was just artistic. It really was an expression of we've arrived. I didn't talk about it, but I should have probably before this. Why did they use cobblestones? Because it was the available building material for them. And they had really become successful at this point in the 1820s, 1830s, after the opening of the Erie Canal. Farming was a profitable occupation after the Erie Canal reduced the cost of shipping of their products to such a low degree that they really couldn't afford to say we've arrived and we want to live in a different house. So they moved out of their log cabins and they used the building material which was at hand and created this cobblestone masonry construction, which was really not new to them. It wasn't a new building form. It can be found in New England, it can be found in Europe. Not to the degree that happened here locally in Western New York. It really was a fad that took off and really became a success story. And you don't find it in cities. The city of Rochester has one cobblestone building. Erie County has two cobblestone buildings, and neither one of them is in Buffalo. Niagara County has, I believe, 50, Orleans County has 100, Monroe County has 100, Wayne County has 200. So you see the theme as we run across the state of cobblestone masonry really was in rural farming areas, and it was not for city dwellers. Here's an example of that rubble wall I was talking about. A piece of a rubble wall is sitting on a windowsill at the Cobblestone Museum, so we can demonstrate how the rubble wall was actually built. You can see the wall is like 24 inches thick. That piece of a rubble wall is sitting in a window well, just to demonstrate what the wall would look like underneath it. And it is not artistic. It is a structural member. It is just stone upon stone with this limestone mortar holding the walls together, but no attempt to make rows. No one's going to see it. When they're all done, they built plaster and lath on the inside. On the outside, they built beautiful veneer cobblestone masonry, so you don't see it after your building is complete, but that really is what took place. Here you can see in graphic display a wall that has failed. And for the most part, these walls are very structurally sturdy and very sound. The trick to keeping your cobblestone building in good shape is make sure you keep your roof in good shape. What happens if water gets between those two walls that I told you about, the veneer, the cobblestone veneer, and the rubble wall, gets in there in the winter, water will accumulate, it'll build up, it'll freeze and push the walls apart, and then you have a collapse. So if that happens, basically your building is starting to fall apart. Over time, this became very ornate. The original buildings were very simple. There was not an attempt to embellish the appearance of them. Like the Cobblestone Church we are in, it was built in 1834. It's a simple utilitarian building with a cobblestone veneer. But there was really not a large attempt to create an artistic statement. But over time, the masons became much more embellished. The masonry work was much more embellished. You can see 4 different examples. I'm going to give you a close-up of each. The lower right is what's called the Gaines hexagonal. It's found largely in the town of Gaines, is where you'll find the most of these. It's in Orleans County. It almost looks like a honeycomb. So the mason has taken his trowel and has created an artistic shape around each of the stones. One to the left of it has a ridge at the end of each, along the edge of each row, which makes it very distinctive. Upper right-hand corner, I didn't bring a cobblestone, but I wish I had. A lake wash cobble, those is what's called a herringbone pattern. The individual skipping stones you find at the lake, that is with the small, skinny portion facing out. So 3/4 of the stone is not seen. All you're seeing is the very skinny edge. Each row is laid in an alternating direction so as to create the illusion of a herringbone pattern. So Another Mason in Orleans County was Cyrus Witherall was his name. And he used that exclusively in the front of buildings that he built. Upper left-hand corner, I call that a gingerbread batter just because it reminded me of a gingerbread house. Here's the Gates hexagonal that I told you about, the honeycomb pattern. You can find that in different buildings in Orleans County. Here's that herringbone pattern. Okay, cobblestone buildings themselves, where are they located? You have a few here in the immediate vicinity, but over the 1820s to 1860s, 1,000 cobblestone buildings were built in New York State. And 900 of those are within 75 miles of Rochester, New York. Why? Because that's where the stones were. That's where the farmers had made piles of stones. And that's where the successful farmers had the wherewithal to build statement homes. So it's largely a Western New York phenomenon. I don't think we as Western New Yorkers realize that there's so few of these in other states. There's about 100 outside of New York State. About 20 of those are in Paris, Ontario. One community in Ontario that had a local mason, Levi Boughton, left Western New York and moved to Paris, Ontario, and built a few more homes in his lifetime. And Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, they'll have a handful. They won't have a lot. As I said, there's only 100 in other states. Every instance of a building, of a cobblestone building in another state was built by a Western New York mason who moved to that state and just built a couple more in his lifetime. So it was not a skill that was passed along widely to other masons. Some feel that it was the out-of-work Great Canal laborers who turned their attention to building cobblestone buildings. I have no real documentation to prove that, but it's a nice story. So until it's proven otherwise, we can say that yes, there were probably out-of-work Great Canal masons that were involved in this. It really became not only an art form, it became a marketing concept. A mason, because he could only build a certain number of horses a day, as I said, usually the height of one coin was the amount of work he could do in a day, because the lime mortar needed to set up. It usually took a week to set up so that it would become hard enough so he could continue to build the house higher. So after a day, he needed someplace else to work or he'd be out of work. So a smart marketing team that he had employed with him, probably his wife and his kids, went to each neighbor along the street and says, you know, your neighbor's building this beautiful cobblestone house and it's really going to be something when it's done. Don't you think you'd like one? And because you're right next door, you can have the same house, or we can do it a little different. And it's going to be much cheaper for you because the mason is in the neighborhood. You've already got those stones, so let's use those up. That type of a marketing technique. Here's a map that shows the configuration here in New York State. You can see largely the predominance, the closeness to Lake Ontario determines how many buildings were built in each county. I was right, Niagara County had 56, Orleans County 111, Monroe County 133 with only one in the city of Rochester, which is in danger. They want to turn it into a parking lot, so we don't want that to happen. The city of Rochester actually bought the building so that they're not going to be able to turn it into a parking lot, but hopefully they will be able to preserve it. Wayne County having the most, to the east of Monroe County at 210, then a smattering of the other counties that surround Lake Ontario. Further away you get from Lake Ontario, you run out of cobblestone buildings. So it's a local phenomenon, which is probably one of the reasons why the three buildings that are at the Cobblestone Museum were granted National Historic Landmark status. It's called the Cobblestone National Historic Landmark District. That happened in the 1990s, early 1990s, and it's been a blessing for us. It's allowed us to create or to apply for different grants that may not have been available to us without the National Landmark status. So, just to put that in perspective, too, many of you may know people who have or may have a home on the National Register themselves, which is a wonderful designation. But for every 200 homes on the National Register, only one is granted National Historic Landmark status. So it really is a statement that says this is something important that represents a trend in the whole nation needs to be aware of. So it really was, it's part of our national history taking place here in Western New York. So we need to make sure we share that history with everyone in the nation. Much like adobe homes in the West and salt boxes in New England, the Cobblestone home here in Western New York is really a local treasure. I'm going to show you any questions about how cobblestone buildings were built before I move on? Yes?
You said that not very many, but very few homes were built in other states by people that moved there and knew how to do it.
Yes.
So, did they just happen to have cobblestones there, or did they have to take cobblestones with them to build those?
The same ice age that impacted us impacted all of the Great Lakes areas. So if it's a Great Lakes area, a regional state, they would have had cobblestones available to them.
Thank you.
Yes.
So the rubble wall and then the faces from here, was there any attachment other than the mortar?
A couple of inch air gap, but I described it, you didn't want to let water get between. And there were some sleeper boards that connected those two walls so that they were, as the mortar was setting up, it would always have a little bit of support over the wall. The rubble wall itself was usually built 1 foot higher than the outer veneer so that it was good and solid and then supported the cobblestones with sleeper boards between the two. Did I answer your question? I don't remember.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was another one, yes.
Can the limestone mortar be recreated
Yes.
now?
Yes, masons will not want to do it. You imagine trying to burn limestone to create your own quicklime mortar? It's not a process that they will do because the reason that cobblestone masonry fell out of favor is it's very time consuming and very expensive, very labor intensive. And the masons, they slap up a brick wall pretty quickly with Portland cement. It sets up the next day, it sets up the same day in many cases, so you just keep building and building, so it's a much quicker and cheaper and more effective way to build a building. But yes, there are masons local, one in North Tonawanda, his name is, I'll put in a commercial for him, Brian Davis. If you have a historic home and it used lime mortar, then you do not want to make your repairs with Portland cement because the two different cements will fight each other. It's an actual chemical process. Lime mortar never actually completely hardens, believe it or not, and it breathes. So to put Portland cement on it, the cement that completely hardens and covers up the mortar that's supposed to breathe, those two will never work together. So it still can be done. Masons can take this process that was used back then and simplify it a little. They can buy lime instead of burning limestone to make lime. And then they can work with it with the parameters that it's going to take longer and it's going to be more expensive.
Could you use the Portland cement with cobblestone now? Would the building last as long as these have lasted?
I've not seen an example of that, but I believe you could, yeah, because you've seen stone buildings that are still being built today with Portland cement.
But it doesn't breathe.
No, it does not breathe. I don't know how the process, the longevity of the process, if it will be the same or not. These buildings are going on 200 years old. Ours are all coming up on 200 years, so they're in good shape. You just have to keep that roof in good shape. Yes? Sorry? Sleeper board, it is just a small piece of wood that's between two walls. It's just the name they gave it. No why. Yeah.
Is that a form, so to speak, of the rubble wall up the sleeper board?
Sleeper board is just meant to provide a little extra support to the outer cobblestone wall as it's being built. Yes.
I just noticed looking at the map, and of course I was fixated right back there, and then the little enlargements from all around, what was included? Really? Is that
focus?
down there?
I I think it says there's 0 down there, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's nothing down there.
There's 0 down there. Is that in focus?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
From up here, you guys can do a better picture of it. No, all those lower counties are 0. Matter of fact, the green had none. Anything that's green has.
Oh, yeah, of course, they were shaded.
Yeah, the shaded ones, the pink ones are the ones that have cobblestone masonry. Anything else about the building itself? Okay, we're going to give you some examples. Next. Here, you've seen this building locally.
Mm-hmm.
It's just up the road, more or less, the Northridge Methodist Church, right? It's located at 3930 North Ridge Road, Route 93, in the hamlet of town of Cambria, in the hamlet of Northridge. It was built in 1848. It's constructed mostly of round, evenly colored lake wash cobbles. There are 4 or 5 courses to the limestone coin. That is another measure of the, let's say the value of the cobblestone home. If the mason took the time to put 5 or 6 courses between, in the height of a coin instead of 3 or 4, it meant he really wanted that building to make a statement. Because it took him longer and it took more stone, so more lime mortar. Everything that made the building more expensive was taking place in that home. So this is Cobblestone Church, 1848. It's about the middle of the cobblestone era, and it's a wonderful example of the cobblestone masonry in that area. Anybody been there? You've probably seen the church, right?
I think so, yeah.
This house is located at 9491 Ridge Road. It's called the Chimpanzee House. It's in the town of Heartland. Various size field stones, different shapes and colors. And the corner coins are red sandstone, most likely Medina sandstone. So you can see in the inset there too, the embellishment between the rows that the mason has used to make it stand out. This is the Philo Newton House. It's on Ruck Road in the town of Heartland, built in 1830, so it's an early example. You can see the stones are a little bit larger. It's on a 100-acre farm on Ruck Road. It was built in 1830, so it's a little earlier. It's a Greek Revival style. Newton was born in Vermont and came to this area in 1830. He purchased land from the Holland Land Company. And it's listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Most cobblestone buildings can be listed fairly quickly in the National Register of Historic Places because the groundwork has already been done. The National Register has recognized this as a historic architecture form which is worthy of being nominated and designated as National Register candidates. So if you know someone who has a historic cobblestone home, he hasn't already become a National Register. He should, because it opens up a certain amount of tax incentives to the average homeowner. This is the Whitney Taylor home, located in the town of Cambria, built in 1840. It was constructed of small water wash stones. You can see, I would call that pattern the gingerbread pattern. Okay, we're a little further afield now. I've taken you to Michigan. This is the Dr. Benajah Tickner House in Ann Arbor, Michigan, built in 1844. Currently is owned by the city of Ann Arbor and is a museum. And it was built by Stephen Mills, who learned to become a mason in the community of Phelps, New York. This is an example of a building that doesn't have coins. So you can see the rounded wall construction there in the forefront. And this is in Paris, Ontario, Canada. It's about an hour and a half drive to view these 15 homes in Paris and certain churches and buildings. This one doesn't have coins. The problem with not having a coin is if you were to try to create a tight corner, you'd have a rounded lump bumping into a rounded lump on the other wall with the ability of water to get between those stones. And over time, the water would have eroded the lime mortar and created a fault in the wall. So coins are very important. So, most of the cobblestone buildings you see will have the limestone coins on the corners. Here's one that doesn't. So I told you, I think I told you I was going to show you one. This is one of the largest cobblestone buildings that was constructed in the cobblestone era. It's in Bergholz, New York, Route 20 in Madison County. It's a multi-use facility at this point. Originally, it was had a pharmacy and had stores. Now it's some lawyers' offices, and I think the upper rooms are all high-end apartments at this point. So hopefully, this building is going to be around for a lot longer as well. Any questions about the buildings I've shown you? Yes.
When they built the buildings originally in the early 1800s, how did they finish the inside?
Most of them were plaster and lath. They put a few pieces of wood into that interior rubble wall so that there was a way to fasten the plaster and lath to the wood.
So then when they electrified the homes after the turn of the century, then
Usually they ran the wiring on the inside of the wall.
so with the lath and everything, they were able to run wires inside.
Yeah, usually along the baseboard of the wall, there was a channel covering up the wiring. For the most part, they didn't attempt to get between the walls and put in electrical wiring in the typical fashion of a box in the wall. That would have happened later. Some people actually have taken their cobblestone home and have built another home inside of it, so they could put in more insulation. They use studs and insulation and wallboard to create a second home inside their cobblestone home, so that they have better insulation and modern electric conveniences that we're talking about. So, cobblestone homes these days are they're a respected commodity. If you go back to the 1960s, many of them were falling down. That's how the Cobblestone Museum got its start. It wanted to save the Cobblestone Church in the community of Charles, New York, in Orleans County. By 1960, people viewed them as old-fashioned. They were cold in the winter and hot in the summer. It was kind of like an oven. Once you heated up, the stones always held the heat, and it was hard to get them cool again. So they weren't considered to be a nice modern home like people were building in the 1960s. So they had kind of fallen out of fashion, to be quite honest, unfortunately. And it wasn't until historic preservation-minded citizens became involved that people began to realize that these are treasures. These are buildings that will never be replaced, and they need to be maintained. If you own one today, if you had bought one today recently and bought them in the 1960s, you probably could have gotten them for half of the value of what a wooden home would sell for. Today, they sell for 2 to 3 times the value of a wooden home. So they are very good investments, as long as you're willing to pay the price of making sure that it's kept in good shape. So, they're not going to go down again, they're just going to go up, because no one's building these. So all the ones that exist are the ones that people are going to be able to purchase, and there won't be any more. So they are a good investment. Cobblestone Museum.
Doug, I have another.
Yep, another question, sure.
In South Buffalo, they have what's called the Cobblestone
District? Yeah.
And that's based on roads.
Is that based on the streets?
Yeah. Are those are different kind of cobblestones?
I would imagine in Buffalo, they're still probably using glacial cobblestones. But there's cobblestone streets in New York City that aren't using glacial cobblestones, so, yeah.
I think the cobblestones in Buffalo, they made the original cobblestones. They're huge.
Are they big?
They're very heavy.
Okay.
They're maybe 12 by 6 in plan, and they're very heavy. I don't know.
So they're probably not the glacial remnants, they're probably not the glacial knockoffs that the homes were being built with, so more likely than not, they may have been quarried or whatever. Okay? Yes, go
Yeah.
ahead.
When people come across the fired brick versions of cobblestones, why are they still called cobblestones, even though they're made of fired brick? And is that like a colloquial term?
You're talking about the replica cobblestones?
Yeah, well, like the fired brick type of cobblestone. It's not necessarily a cobblestone in that way, right?
It's not a glacial remnant if it was,
Yeah.
if it's a fire, so.
If it's still
It's
called
probably a misnomer.
right, it's something of a misnomer then, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
a lack of better words or term for it, performing the same function, basically.
Hey, it looks like a cobblestone, so we call it a cobblestone.
Okay.
Maybe in a modern attempt to make something modern look old, seem old. But just so you know, there were brickyards in the same counties that these buildings were built before people were building cobblestone homes. So the bricks was a building choice, but it wasn't the statement that cobblestone homes were made. Cobblestone was at that time, modern form of building that which people really wanted. Bricks were old-fashioned. You see those hundreds of years ago in New England. They wanted something that said, this is really new, this is modern, and we're successful. We want people to see something different here. We don't just want a brick house. We could use bricks, but we don't want to. We're going to use cobblestone. Very regional. Cobblestone Museum got started in 1960. Grassroots group of citizens, probably the same type of thing that happened with Das Haus. I'm not sure what the history of Das Haus is, but probably someone looked at it and says, we got to do something to save this building or it's not going to be there forever. The Cobblestone Church was the first building that they turned their attention to, which was built in 1834. It's the oldest cobblestone church in North America. I say North America because there is one in Paris, Ontario, so this one is older than that one as well. 26 were built over the cobblestone era, and this is the oldest. There are some that are larger. The Cobblestone Church in Webster, New York is larger, but this is still the oldest.
Where is this one?
Pardon?
Where is this church?
That's our museum, located in Albion, New York, Orleans County. On a good day, a 45-minute drive from here.
Because I think there's a Universalist or Unitarian church in Niagara Falls that
Yes.
has, it looks
I
like
think
it
it might
has
be,
cobblestone.
I'm not sure if it's cobblestone or not.
It looks like it has slate,
Yeah.
like sideways too.
Yeah. This was a building that was in jeopardy. 1960, several local historians decided they would create a society, Cobblestone Society, to save the building. Did some fundraising, were able to purchase the building from a local farmer who was using the church for cabbage storage. Immediately put a new roof on it to save the walls, and took the cabbage out, and started to talk to local families who had remnants of the pews and the beautiful beautiful lighting fixtures that were in the original church, kerosene lamps and different things. We're able to restore a lot of the old furnishings to this church, starting in 1960. It was a Unitarian church. We don't see them as much here, but they were very prevalent in Monroe and Orleans County. It was probably the largest Protestant denomination in that area. And its claim to fame is that it was not Catholic. They were very proud of the fact that they were not Catholic. So, nothing against Catholicism, it's just I'm telling you a historical fact. The Unitarian Church was very, wanted to make sure people knew they weren't Catholic. They didn't want to have a steeple. They didn't want to have a bell in their steeple. They didn't, or in their tower. They built a tower, but not a steeple. And then they didn't want to have a bell in that, because it's too Catholic. They didn't want a pulpit raised up in the air, because that was too Catholic. So everything took place right at ground level. And even the way that the pews were oriented. Catholic churches had the pews facing in a certain direction. I can't tell you which it is, but if you go in our church, they're in the opposite direction. Because they didn't want the church to resemble a Catholic church. No stained glass, none of the typical icons that would be found in a Catholic church were found in a Unitarian church. The premise of the Unitarian church is God is love. That is the basic. I'm sure that the Catholics believe that too. But that was their mantra, God is love. And no one was going to hell, which is a nice philosophy. Most of Christian churches don't believe that, but they would believe that. Unitarian, non-Unitarian, Universalist church still hold to that kind of a faith. that everyone will be together in heaven. So that was what the church was founded on. It was a very, very popular religion in Orleans County. There were several Unitarian churches, so you don't see them as much here locally, but that's what we have. We saved one of those. The congregation met there until 1890, and then they moved. They built another church in Albion, which is about 3 miles away. Why did they move? Because that's where the center of population had moved. This church was built in the very early days of the Erie Canal, and population had not migrated to the vicinity of the Erie Canal. Once people moved their businesses and their life to the canal communities, people from this church decided, well, we should move to the Albion as well, right here by the canal. This particular church was fortunate in that it had a benefactor. It had George Pullman, who was a member here when he lived in Albion. He had a furniture store in Albion. George Pullman, of course, is the founder of the Pullman Palace car, the sleeping car, which still has all the patents that are used today for sleeping on a train. He moved his business, his furniture business. He moved it to Chicago and became the king of building railroad cars, sleeping cars. And he attended this church, and when the church moved, they asked him if because he was already in Chicago, they said, we want to move to a larger community. Would you give us $5,000 to help us build the church, and we raise the rest? He says, well, no, you raise the $5,000 and I'll give you all the rest. So they immediately set to raise $5,000, which was a lot of money at that time, but they were very successful in raising it in just a matter of a year. And then he built what's called the Pullman Memorial Church in the community of Albion. It too is a Unitarian church, and there's still a congregation that meets there today. We have weddings in our church. We have 2 church services a year. That same church that I told you about in Albion comes back once a year for a service. And then the Cobblestone Museum has a patriotic service in that church once a year for the 4th of July. And weddings, dedications, renewals, anything like that people would want to do. Here's a shot of the interior. A lot different than cabbage storage, isn't it? Overhead, you can see the flue pipes. They proceed back to a wood stove, 2 wood stoves at the back of the church, and that was really an intentional decision to add to the heating components of the stove by keeping the stovepipes in the interior of the building, so they do give off a lot of radiant heat. There's a balcony on each side. In the front of the church, it looks like there is a 3-dimensional wall. It's not. It's a straight wall. It's a trompe l'oeil, which is an illusion, an optical illusion that a painter can do. You give a flat wall 3-dimensional depth. So even when you stand up close to it, you don't realize it's not 3-dimensional until you're close enough to touch it. There's 1,000 window panes, just so you know. We're in the process of receiving grants to make sure that all the wooden components of the windows are in top-notch shape. After almost 200 years, the wooden components have degraded, so cobblestones are still fine, but the wooden windows were having some difficulties. So. Here's our second cobblestone building. This was acquired after the Cobblestone Church was acquired. It's the Ward House that I spoke to you about earlier. It was acquired in the 1960s as well. It was a simple parsonage. It was a simple utilitarian structure. They lived in the basement for a few years. The kitchen and bedrooms and everything were in the basement. Then they added the upper first story. And they put more bedrooms in the first story. And eventually they built a kitchen, a wooden addition for the kitchen. The problem with it was, I said it was a parsonage. One of the very first parsonage families that lived there had 10 children. So it was no way large enough for 10 children, so it got other uses. Eventually it became a private residence. The Ward House itself has kind of an interesting story. Anybody recognize this man? Horace Greeley. Remember his famous saying, "Go west, young man"? He was the editor of the New York Tribune. He also ran unsuccessfully for, I believe, vice president, possibly president, I'm not sure. But in his day, he owned the Ward House, the same house we were talking about. His nephew had purchased the home, and Horace Greeley, his uncle, gave him a second mortgage or whatever on the house, and he could purchase it, but unfortunately, the nephew passed away, and the widow was not able to make the payments, so he took possession of the house. He lived there for one summer as he was preparing to sell the house. Horace Greeley is a connection, and he attended at the Unitarian Church there also as well. So. This house is decorated in the Victorian era. There's a Victorian dining room. All of our furnishings are on open display, so when you come, you can see everything up close. We'll just request that you not touch everything, but all of our tours are guided tours because of the fact that nothing is behind doors and nothing is closed off. So we need to make sure that our artifacts are maintained and that we'll be there when our guests leave. Here's the parlor. It's dark by intention. The historical homes in the Victorian era were largely very dark compared to today's standards. So we've not made an attempt to add a huge amount of electrical lighting. So we just added enough to keep people from tripping and falling. Our third project was the Cobblestone's one-room schoolhouse. Built in 1849 and closed in 1952. It was an example of a one-room schoolhouse education. And it was the third Cobblestone building that the Cobblestone Museum acquired. It was slated for migrant housing at the time that we purchased it, so we feel we saved it from a sure fire problem. I'm sure they would have sooner or later been remodeled and all the interiors would have been changed it out. But it is still a time capsule of early education, just as it was last used in 1952. It was grades K through 8 in one room, and it's known as District Number 5 schoolhouse in the town of Gaines. There were, I believe, 9 schoolhouses in the town of Gaines, largely located along the Ridge Road. There was a state law at that time that no student needed to walk more than 1 mile to or from school. So you needed a school every 2 miles, so that all your students could get there by walking. Maybe mom and dad would be generous and take them on the sleigh in the winter, who knows. There was a plan afoot for a one-room schoolhouse education, grades K through 8. So many times the older students help the younger students learn their lessons and reading, writing, and arithmetic. So the teacher couldn't possibly be teaching all 8 grade levels at the same time, so there needed to be a cooperative experience in education. So you would most likely call one particular grade level up to the front of the room that was called a recitation desk, where students would sit and would recite their homework back to the teacher. And they'd go back to their desks and work on another set of materials at their desks, and then the next grade would come forward and would recite their homework to the teachers. It was very effective over 100 years. In 1952, Albion, New York State passed certain regulations that really basically made the one-room schoolhouse outmoded, and centralized schools became the norm. The buses that took students, so they still didn't have to walk more than a mile. And it's the system we live with today.
Why was the floor slanted?
It was a means so that the students sitting at the back of the room could see the boards and everything much more effectively. Kind of like a theater. That rows in the theater are higher than the rows in the front. Yeah. It was a means so that any runoff off these upper floors would hit that water table and would fall away from the foundation. Keep the amount of water that's going into the lower level to a minimum. This is our second most recent addition. We acquired this in 2019. This is the Bag House. This is the home of blacksmith Joseph Bag. It is Grandma's house. Remember Grandma's house, she probably had an extension cord dangling from a light fixture and over the dining room table so she could run her waffle iron.
Yeah.
So that was the type of early electric appliances that this home features. It's got a monitor top refrigerator, it's got an early washing machine with 2 tubs, a wringer, and that type of process. It's got a coal stove and an electric stove, which early families did, as they were modernizing it. They didn't take out the old wood stove because that had its purpose. But they would put an electric stove next to the wood stove. So almost everything that you can think of had an electrical component in the 1920s. I think it was Edison that said, electricity is the only servant you will ever need. And in the early electric homes, even a flour sifter, you can imagine, was electrified. So this would be a simple mechanical process. Needed to be electrified, so the modern homemaker didn't have to squeeze the handle.
Where did the stairs go?
Where do you think they go? That's called a carriage step. Does that give it away? Yeah. If you were a modern lady in the 1890s and you arrived to this home in a sleigh or a carriage, you'd be able to step out of that carriage without getting your dress dirty. You'd step right out of that set of steps and then daintily walk down the steps to get into the house. You can almost picture taking this. It almost seems southern, doesn't it? A southern belle would be using those steps. So if you see pictures of old homes, you'll usually find one of those sets of steps out in the front lawn.
Yeah.
This is our Artisan Alley. You can see this is 2 of our buildings here in Artisan Alley. This is the print shop and the harness shop. Both of those were moved to our campus, and they are currently used to house our collection of printing presses and our harness shop, which is our collection of leatherworking goods. The leatherworking setup, they made saddles there, and eventually they made shoes there. And horses were no longer needing leather goods. Farmers weren't using horses, they were using tractors, so the same person who was making saddles turned their attention to making shoes, so that he would continue in the leatherworking industry. Print shop, this is an example of a small job printer, where they would make invitations, flyers, and that kind of small job, maybe up to 100 copies of something. But they weren't making books, which was a large job printer, which would make thousands of copies of books. So this was a small job printer. Both of those buildings were built to our campus. We moved to our campus in the 1980s. We saved buildings that were being threatened to be destroyed at other locations in Orleans County. Farmers Hall. Farmers Hall is another Unitarian church. It was moved to our campus from the community of Kendall, New York. It served 2 different congregations, so originally a Unitarian church and then a Lutheran church. And after about 100 years, it became the Kendall Town Hall. And then when Kendall decided they wanted a modern town hall, they said, can you come and get rid of this building? Because the firemen want to use it for a practice night. So the director at the Cobblestone Museum at that time says, yeah, give me a day or 2 and we'll come and we'll pick it up. So they disassembled the building, board by board, numbered the boards, transported them to our museum campus, and then reassembled them kind of like a jigsaw, and without skilled labor. And it's still standing today. It's needed a couple tweaks here and there to support the overhead rafters, but it's really a remarkable example of a 1830s wooden structure that was originally a church. It houses our collection of farm tools. We have a great, much like your Sanborn Museum here in the vicinity, has an amazing collection of farm tools. This is my winter office. This is the brick house. It is an example of a brick house that was built in the cobblestone era. So yes, people were using bricks as a building material. And currently houses our research library and has a upper gallery, which is housing our collection of Victorian morning art. And that's where my office is in the winter months. In the summer, I'm just busy with all of the visitors who come to the museum, so I don't have much time for my office work in the summer. This is our new visitor center. It's our most recent addition. We bought this in just after COVID, 2021, I believe. And it was another building which Crosby's wanted to turn that into a convenience store. So we were pleased that we were able to acquire that from the owner and save that. It's a beautiful 1830s brick structure. And it's going to be our visitor center. We currently use it for meeting space and exhibit space. And we're in the process of the newsletter that I gave you. You'll see we're in the middle of a capital campaign to raise $1.5 million to build a room such as this. We'd love to have a nice meeting space where we can have 100 people come in and serve them a meal. And also if someone wanted to have a wedding reception and all the different uses that a building like this could do for us. So we're about halfway there. We're continuing to raise funds. Back page of your newsletter is a way that you might be able to support that at some point if you have the wherewithal. We'd love you to be a member. You can do that for $25. That was my only commercial, okay? Other than I want you to come visit. This time of year we have tours by appointment. In the summer we have students, interns that work with us, so if you come next summer, you can come anytime you want. Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 5. This time of year, if you'd like to come, we just ask that you call us before you come so that we can make sure somebody's there to do the tour. Okay? We have 10 buildings. Full tour takes about 2 hours. We'd love you to come. We've got a couple events coming up on the front page of your newsletter. This Saturday, we have a tour of homes. If you want to see some different types of architectural homes in our vicinity and Oregon County, you just have to get there, because once you get there, everything is within a couple miles of each other. So there's 12 stops on our tour this year. It's taking place this Saturday. You can go into the interiors of each of these buildings. The owners have graciously allowed people to go in and see the insides of their homes. It's a wonderful tour. We have one every year. This one is probably one of the nicer ones that we have. Also this fall yet, October 5 is our open house. If you come on October 5, all of our buildings will be open. We'll have printers, we'll have artisans, we'll have leather workers, we'll have rug makers, we'll have basket weavers, you weave a basket, rug weavers, but whatever. We have all of the artisans will be on campus working. We have a beef on weck dinner if you'd like to stay for lunch for beef on weck. You don't have to, everything is free other than the beef on weck. So that's October 5, it's a Saturday, it's coming up very quickly, and it's probably be your last chance to visit this fall. Okay? I think I'm near the end of my slides. There we did it. Any questions? Yes?
It's not really a question, I just want to say that you would have to really say the Cobblestone homes are works of art because they're so unique and, you know, you'll never have any more like it ever again. So,
We have to save them.
and all the work that went into that,
Mhm.
you know, painstaking
Yep.
work.
The nice part is that they're not too difficult to save.
Yeah,
Like I
so
said, they're
it's
200 years
wonderful
old and very
that-
little work has been done on our building other than occasional pre-pointing of some mortar and making sure the roof is in good shape. And working on the wooden components. As I said, the church windows needed to be, the wood needed to be updated. Wood goes punchy after a while, so you gotta make sure it's.
Do you think the masons were actual artists? Do you call them that?
They became more artistic as time went on, yes. I would call them artists, yes.
I would.
Well, my house was built in between 1958 and 1961 by Alfred Wallonick, who
Oh.
was a former Korean War Seabee War veteran who was used to building quickly and so forth in the service during the Korean War period. He comes back, founds his own business, North Tonawanda, Pendleton area, comes into Wheatfield and builds his own house out of stone quarried up from King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, because he liked the mix of stone down there, put it all together. His wife, when the family sold the house to us, said later on that everything, as it was built all the way around in stone, they had to be layered down in sections like that.
Mhm.
Time to cure, and then they add more cure and so forth in that old-fashioned way,
Yes.
but in a modern mid-century house. So it's kind of interesting.
There's a lore that says that the Masons did not reveal their secrets. And this comes from the fact that they covered their work with burlap. When they weren't on the home, and they'd be gone for a week or so as the home was curing, they covered it with burlap so that it would dry slowly. So the rumor became, well, they don't want people to see what they're doing there, so it must be a secret. But
Right.
there are Masons that can do it. It's not a secret. So.
Thanks very much, Doug.
Yeah.
I have 5 minutes to share something. Some of you may know I am a genealogist, and I